All right, let's get right into it. Every single time you stream a movie, fire off an email, or jump on a video call, you are tapping into a massive, hidden global network. Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on the physical, nuts and bolts infrastructure that makes our entire digital world even possible. We talk about the internet like it's some kind of magic. It's just wireless, it's all ethereal, the data's just floating around up there in the cloud. But is that really what's happening? Is your data just beaming through the air to a server on the other side of the planet? Well, the reality is a lot more grounded. Or maybe I should say submerged. A truly staggering 97% of all international data isn't wireless at all. That's right. The cloud is actually at the bottom of the ocean. Our entire global interconnected so-called wireless world is built on a foundation of physical wires, thick cables stretching between continents. So the big takeaway here is the internet is very, very physical. So let's start by trying to wrap our heads around the sheer, mind-boggling scale of this underwater network. As of right now, there are more than 800,000 miles of these subsea cables crisscrossing the globe. I mean, that's just an immense figure that's almost impossible to really picture on its own. But this really puts it into perspective, doesn't it? Imagine a single cable stretching from right here on Earth all the way to the moon, and then all the way back again. That is how much wire is just sitting there on our ocean floors, quietly powering pretty much all of modern life. So, the next obvious question is, how in the world does a network of this size even get there in the first place? Let's take a quick look at how these cables are laid, because it is just a colossal engineering feat. It's a remarkably delicate and slow process. First, these huge specialized ships map out a perfect route to avoid things like fault lines or heavy fishing areas. Then, they literally unspool thousands of miles of cable right onto the surface of the ocean, floating it with buoys. When the weather's just right, they cut the buoys and the cable slowly sinks to the bottom, all while technicians monitor it to make sure it lays perfectly flat. But the ocean floor isn't exactly a safe and quiet place. The biggest threats are actually us, human activities, like fishing boats and giant ships dragging their anchors along the seabed. But the thing on this list that always gets people is that last one. Yep, shark bites. It sounds crazy, but it has actually happened to some of Google's cables in the past. Okay, so now let's zoom way in. We've seen the massive scale, but now let's look at the incredible technology inside these cables that makes them so powerful. You might be picturing these enormous, thick tubes, but for all their importance, these cables are surprisingly thin, often no wider than a regular garden hose. But packed inside that small casing is a secret to their mind-blowing performance: thousands of tiny individual fiber optic threads. So how does it work? Well, it's based on a physics principle called total internal reflection. What that means basically is that laser pulses, which are carrying your data, are beamed down these tiny glass fibers. The light bounces perfectly along the inside walls of the fiber, traveling for thousands of miles at unbelievable speeds with almost zero signal loss. It's pure physics. So how fast are we really talking about here? Well, to give you an example, the Maria cable, which connects the US to Spain, can carry 224 terabytes of data every single second. And the crazy part is, new cables being laid today are aiming for more than double that capacity. It's an amount of information that is just hard to even comprehend. So this infrastructure is obviously essential to the global economy, to everything we do. Which brings up a really important question. Who actually owns and controls this whole global network? The ownership landscape has shifted dramatically over the decades. It all started with the old-school telecom giants, the AT&Ts of the world. Then, in the 90s dot-com boom, all these specialized private companies jumped in. But today, we are firmly, and I mean firmly, in the era of big tech. And this is where things get really interesting. Just a handful of companies, we're talking Google, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft, now own or lease more than half of all the bandwidth on the ocean floor. They're not just customers of the network anymore. They are building and owning it themselves, just to keep up with their own enormous data demands. But what about the future? I mean, with all the buzz around projects like Starlink, isn't satellite internet just going to make all these cables obsolete anyway? Well, not so fast. When you actually compare them head to head, it's not even close. Undersea fiber optic cables are still way, way better in almost every important metric. We're talking higher speeds, massive capacity, much better reliability, and they are far, far more cost-effective for carrying the world's data. See, satellite internet still faces some major hurdles. The cost of just launching thousands of satellites into orbit is astronomical. It creates a growing risk of space debris collisions, and the technology to have data efficiently hop from one satellite to another is still a huge challenge they're working on.
And, this is really the crucial point. Even the people who are building these massive satellite networks, they see them as a complement to fiber, not a replacement. The whole goal is to connect rural and remote areas where you just can't run a physical cable, not to replace the fundamental backbone of the internet. So, that kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Right now, this hidden network of undersea cables is the undisputed king of global communication. There's no question about it. But in the long run, will it stay that way, or is it destined to become obsolete, replaced by some future technology we can't even imagine yet, just like it replaced the very first telegraph cables that crossed the ocean 170 years ago? That's a question only the future can answer.